What happens when a man who has everything is faced with the one thing he can't control? On Stellara Air's exclusive transatlantic flight, a billionaire's son, locked in a world of silence, has a terrifying public meltdown at 39,000 feet. The cabin crew is frozen, the passengers are terrified, and the boy's powerful father can only respond with fury. But a single black flight attendant with a past she never speaks of steps forward. What she does next will stun everyone. It's an act of grace that will go viral, cost a titan his empire, and expose a devastating secret that karma was waiting to collect on. This isn't just a story about a flight. It's about a crash landing into reality. The air inside the celestial suite aboard Stellara Air Flight 112 was different. It wasn't just filtered and temperature-controlled. It was air that cost more per cubic foot than the average person's monthly rent. This was the most exclusive commercial cabin in the world, a private apartment carved into the front of a state-of-the-art Airbus A350 on its nightly voyage from New York's JFK to London Heathrow. And tonight, its sole occupants were Andrew Finch and his 10-year-old son, Leo. Andrew Finch was a man forged in the crucible of capital. His company, Finch Dynamics, was a behemoth of the tech world, pioneering AI integration for global logistics and defense. His face, a mask of chiseled discipline, had graced the cover of Forbes and Wired. His wrist bore a Patek Philippe Grand Complications, a timepiece whose quiet ticking seemed to count money, not seconds. He exuded an aura of frictionless power, a man for whom the world bent. But there was one part of his world that refused to bend. Leo. Leo Finch was the mourned, beautiful and utterly unpredictable counterweight to his father's ordered universe, diagnosed with severe non-verbal autism spectrum disorder. Leo experienced the world as a chaotic symphony of overwhelming sensations. He sat not on the plush leather couch, but on the floor, cross-legged on a custom-made Hermes blanket. His world was contained within the small, smooth grey river stone he rolled between his palms. The stone was his anchor, its predictable texture a shield against the unpredictable storm of life. Andrew looked at his son, and a familiar bitter cocktail of frustration and resentment churned in his gut. This trip was non-negotiable. A multi-billion-dollar merger with British defence contractor Sterling Vance was on the line. He needed to be in London, and his specialised nanny had quit with an abruptness that screamed lawsuit. So he was forced to bring Leo a variable he couldn't code a problem he couldn't solve with money. He saw the trip not as a father-son journey, but as a high-stakes cargo mission. Get the boy from point A to point B with minimal disruption. Leo, Andrew said, his voice crisp and devoid of warmth. Sit on the chair. The floor is for luggage. Leo didn't respond. His entire focus was on the stone, his thumb tracing its subtle imperfections. The low hum of the engines was a constant gnawing pressure against his ears. The shifting cabin light as they climbed through the clouds was a series of silent, disorienting flashes. Andrew sighed a sharp, impatient sound. He was used to his commands being obeyed instantly. He looked away towards the paperwork in his briefcase, deciding to ignore the problem. The problem, however, was just beginning to brew. Outside the soundproofed doors of the Celestial Suite, senior flight attendant Serena Washington was conducting her final checks. With 15 years of service, Serena was the picture of calm authority. Her uniform was immaculate, her smile genuine but firm. She had seen everything the sky could throw at her. Medical emergencies, terrifying turbulence, celebrity meltdowns, and even a proposal at 30,000 feet. She was unflappable. She knew who was in the suite. Andrew Finch. The crew manifest had come with a special addendum about his son's particular needs, a sterile corporate phrase that Serena knew was code for something far more human and complex. The memo suggested providing minimal, non-intrusive interaction. Serena interpreted it as, the rich man doesn't want his problem son to be seen by the staff. A flicker of a memory, sharp and painful, surfaced. Her younger brother David, his face buried in her shoulder, his hands flapping as a crowded mall became too much. The memory was 20 years old, but it was etched into the core of who she was. She understood particular needs in a way no corporate memo ever could. "Everything secure, Serena?" asked a junior flight attendant, a nervous young woman named Chloe. "As it will ever be." Serena smiled. "Now let's get these people to London in one piece." As the plane leveled off at its cruising altitude of 39,000 feet, the fasten seatbelt sign pinged off. A sense of calm settled over the main cabin. But inside the gilded cage of the celestial suite, a silent turbulence was beginning to build. Leo had started to rock a subtle, almost imperceptible motion. The hum of the engines seemed to be getting louder, the artificial light brighter. The grey river stone in his hand was growing warm, its comforting texture no longer enough to hold back the encroaching chaos. Andrew, deep into a contract summary, didn't notice. He was in his world of numbers and clauses of power and acquisition. He was a master of that universe, but he was a passenger in his son's. And the storm was about to break. The trigger was innocuous, a tiny detail in a world built of them. A flight attendant, Chloe following protocol, gently knocked and entered the suite to offer refreshments. Her cheerful, high-pitched query, "Mr. Finch, can I get you or your son anything at all? A juice, some ice cream," shattered the fragile peace. To Leo, the sound was not a question. It was a spike. A sharp auditory needle that pierced the thin bubble of calm he had maintained. The new voice, the unexpected presence, the sugary scent of the perfume she wore, it was a sensory assault. His rocking intensified. The smooth grey stone slipped from his sweaty palm, skittering across the polished wood floor and disappearing under the edge of the couch. His anchor was gone, and Leo was cast adrift in a hurricane. A low moan escaped his lips, a sound of pure primal distress. His hands flew to his ears, pressing hard as if to physically block the world out. Andrew finally looked up, his brow furrowing in annoyance, not concern. "He's fine," he snapped at the startled flight attendant. "Just leave." But Leo was not fine. The moan escalated into a high-pitched, guttural wail. It was a sound of such profound agony that it seemed to vibrate through the very floor of the suite. He began to thrash his small body, contorting on the expensive rug. He slapped at his own head, a desperate attempt to silence the noise inside. "Leo, stop it!" Andrew commanded, standing up. "Stop it right now. You are making a scene." The command was like throwing gasoline on a fire. The word stop had no meaning. The distress was total. Leo scrambled backwards away from his father, his eyes wide with a terror that saw nothing in the room, only the phantoms in his own mind. He kicked out his foot, connecting with a small, elegant table, sending a crystal glass of water crashing to the floor. The sound of shattering glass was the final blow. Leo's wail became a full-throated scream. The noise bled through the soundproofing. In the first-class cabin, just behind the suite, heads turned, murmurs rippled through the seats. In the galley, Chloe stood pale and trembling. "What's going on in there?" her supervisor asked. "It's the boy," she stammered. I don't know, he's screaming." Andrew, his face now a thunderous shade of red, grabbed his son's arm. "Leo, I said enough!" He roared, his voice, so used to commanding boardrooms, now a weapon turned on his own child. This physical restraint was the ultimate betrayal of Leo's world. The touch was fire. The anger was a monster. He bucked wildly, his flailing hand catching Andrew's cheek, the small fingernails leaving a bright red scratch just below his eye. For a moment, the world stopped. Andrew Finch, titan of industry, had been struck by his disabled son. The shock on his face was quickly replaced by a terrifying cold fury. All he could see was the humiliation, the loss of control, the sheer infuriating inconvenience of it all. "You little—" he began, his hand raised not in a caring gesture, but in anger. It was at that exact moment that the door to the suite slid open again. Serena Washington stood there, her face a mask of impenetrable calm. She didn't look at Andrew. She didn't look at the shattered glass. Her eyes, filled with an ancient, knowing sadness, were only on Leo. She saw not a problem, not a scene, not an inconvenience. She saw a child in so much pain he was trying to claw his way out of his own skin. She saw her brother David, 20 years younger, cowering in a department store. She took one step into the suite. "Sir," she said, her voice low, calm, and astonishingly steady. It cut through Andrew's rage and Leo's screaming like a lighthouse beam in a storm. "With your permission, I would like to help your son." Andrew, his hand still half raised, stared at her as if she'd just spoken Martian. Help. This wasn't a situation to be helped. It was a disaster to be contained. "You can't do anything," he spat. "Just get out. Everyone just get out." Serena held his gaze. There was no fear in her eyes, only a profound, unshakable certainty. "I can," she said with 2 words that would ultimately detonate his entire world. "Please, let me try." Before the billionaire could object, she was already moving not towards Leo, but with a series of deliberate, calming actions. The drama of the meltdown was over. The act of grace was about to begin. Serena Washington moved with the quiet efficiency of a bomb disposal expert. Her every action was precise, intentional, and designed to de-escalate the sensory overload that had consumed Leo. First, she turned to the suite's control panel, a state-of-the-art touchscreen that Andrew had been so proud of. With a few swift taps, she dimmed the harsh overhead lights to a soft, warm glow like twilight. She turned off the large monitor displaying the flight path. The visual chaos lessened. Next, she addressed the sound. She didn't try to speak over Leo's cries. Instead, she began to hum. It was a low, monotonous, rhythmic sound, almost like a Buddhist chant. It wasn't a melody. It was a texture, a steady audio baseline that gave his frantic mind something predictable to latch onto. Andrew stood frozen, a statue of impotent fury and bewilderment. He was watching this woman, his employee, take control of a situation that he, with all his power and intellect, had only made exponentially worse. He felt a sting of shame quickly buried under a fresh layer of indignation. Serena ignored him completely. Her focus was a laser beam on the terrified child. She knelt not close to Leo, but a safe 10 feet away, making herself small and unthreatening. She didn't make eye contact, knowing it could be perceived as aggression. Instead, she looked at a point on the floor between them. Leo's wails began to subside, the sharp peaks of his screams, softening into ragged, desperate sobs. His hands were still over his ears, but the pressure seemed to lessen. He peeked through his fingers, his wild eyes catching her movement. Serena saw his gaze flicker to the colorful silk scarf tucked into her uniform's collar. It was a Stellara Air standard, a swirl of blues and silvers. Slowly, deliberately, she untied it. She folded it once, twice, 3 times, creating a neat, predictable square of color. She placed it on the floor in front of her. Then she took out her own personal lanyard, the one that held her security credentials. It was a simple woven fabric lanyard, black with a repeating silver pattern. Nothing special, but it had texture. She ran her thumb over it, making a soft, rhythmic zip, zip, zip sound. Leo's crying hitched. His head tilted his brain, so attuned to patterns, zeroing in on the repetitive sight and sound. He was still terrified, but a sliver of curiosity had pierced the veil of his panic. "It's loud up here," Serena said, her voice barely a whisper, timed between Leo's shuddering breaths. She wasn't talking to him, but for him, narrating his experience, validating it. "The engine hums. The lights are too bright. It's too much. It's okay to feel like it's too much." Andrew flinched as if slapped. In 10 years, he had never once considered validating Leo's feelings. He had only ever tried to correct them. Serena noticed Leo's eyes darting around the floor near the couch. He was searching. She knew instantly what he was looking for. An anchor, a talisman. He had lost his. "Sometimes we lose our quiet," she continued in her soft monotone, still looking at the floor. "And we need to find a new one." Slowly, like a nature documentarian approaching a frightened deer, she began to crawl forward on her hands and knees. She moved at a glacial pace, humming her low, steady note. She didn't look at Leo's face, but at his hands. When she was a few feet away, she stopped. She held out her hand, not with the palm up in a gesture of offering, but palm down the back of her hand, facing him a less demanding posture. Resting on her open fingers was her simple black and silver lanyard. Leo stared at the lanyard. His breathing was still ragged, his body trembling with the aftershocks of the meltdown. He saw the repeating pattern. He heard the quiet hum. He saw this calm, unthreatening human who seemed to understand the storm inside him without even looking at his eyes. For a full minute, nothing happened. Andrew held his breath, the scratch on his face throbbing in time with his pulse. The fate of his transatlantic crossing, and more than he could possibly imagine, hung in this silent tableau. Then, with a tentative trembling motion, Leo reached out. His small fingers brushed against the woven fabric of the lanyard. He felt its texture, its predictable ridges. It wasn't his smooth grey stone, but it was something. It was an anchor in the storm. His fingers closed around it. He didn't snatch it. He accepted it. His terrible world-ending sobs quieted into sniffles. He pulled the lanyard to his chest, clutching it like a holy relic. He lowered his head, his focus shifting from the vast, terrifying chaos of the airplane suite to the small, patterned object in his hands. The storm had passed. Serena stayed kneeling for another moment, then slowly, carefully crawled backwards, giving him his space. She rose to her feet, her movements fluid and silent. She glanced at the shattered glass, then at Andrew. Her face was unreadable. It wasn't triumphant, it wasn't smug. It was simply professional. "I'll have someone clean this up," she said softly. "I'd recommend keeping the lights dim. I won't send anyone else in unless you call." She turned and left, sliding the door shut behind her, leaving a stunned billionaire alone with his son, who was now quietly and intently tracing the patterns on a cheap airline-issued lanyard. Andrew Finch looked at his son, then at the closed door, then at his own reflection in the dark screen of the monitor. He saw the scratch on his cheek, the wild look in his own eyes. For the first time in a long time, the man who controlled everything felt a terrifying, unfamiliar sensation. He had no idea what had just happened. He believed he had averted a crisis. In reality, he had just flown directly into the heart of one. The rest of the flight passed in a thick, unnerving silence. Leo remained on the floor, his world shrinking to the reassuring texture of Serena's lanyard. He never made another sound. Andrew, unable to focus on his work, paced the suite like a curned wolf. He felt a confusing mix of relief, anger, and a deep, gnawing humiliation. His son's meltdown was a flaw in his perfect world. Serena's intervention was an indictment of his own failure. In Andrew's transactional mind, this created a debt, and debts were to be settled swiftly and impersonally with money. It was the only language he truly trusted. As the A350 began its final descent into London, Heathrow, a soft chime indicated the crew should prepare for landing. Andrew saw his opportunity. He pressed the call button. A moment later, the door slid open. It was Serena. Her face was as calm and composed as ever. "Mr. Finch, is everything all right?" "We're landing," he stated, as if announcing a fact she was unaware of. "I want to thank you for your assistance earlier." The words felt like stones in his mouth. "It's my job to ensure the safety and comfort of all passengers," she replied, her tone neutral. "Yes, well, your handling of the situation was effective," he conceded. He reached into his suit jacket, retrieving a slim platinum money clip. It was packed with crisp $100 bills. He slid off a stack, a thick wedge that would likely equal her entire month's salary. "I want you to have this for your trouble. A bonus." He held out the money. It wasn't a gesture of gratitude. It was a dismissal. A payment for services rendered like tipping a porter for handling heavy luggage. It was meant to close the loop, to erase the uncomfortable intimacy of the moment she had succeeded where he had failed to re-establish the master-servant dynamic. Serena looked at the stack of cash in his hand. Then she looked into his eyes. For the first time, Andrew saw a flicker of something other than professional calm in her expression. It was a profound, weary disappointment. She did not take the money. "No, thank you, Mr. Finch," she said, her voice still quiet, but now laced with a spine of steel. Andrew was taken aback. He wasn't used to people refusing his money. "Don't be modest," he insisted, pushing the cash forward slightly. "You deserve it. You went above and beyond." "What I did wasn't for a bonus," she said, her gaze unwavering. "And it cannot be purchased. My concern was for the well-being of a distressed child, not the management of an inconvenient situation." The distinction was a direct hit, and Andrew felt it. She was articulating the very truth he had been trying to bury. He hadn't seen a child. He'd seen a problem. She had. His jaw tightened. The rejection of his money was a rejection of his power, of his entire worldview. "Listen," he said, his voice dropping into a menacingly low register. "I'm offering you a generous tip. I suggest you take it." "And I respectfully decline," Serena replied, her chin lifting slightly. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to prepare the cabin for landing. Please ensure your son is secured." She gave a curt, professional nod and slid the door closed, leaving Andrew standing there with a useless stack of money in his hand. The rage returned hotter than before. Who was this woman to pass judgment on him? An overpaid waitress in the sky, nothing more. He shoved the money back into his pocket, the insult burning like a brand. He had tried to settle the account. She had refused the transaction. In his mind, this made them adversaries. He didn't know how right he was. Unbeknownst to Andrew, to Serena, to everyone in the suite, they had not been entirely alone. In the first-class cabin, seated just one row behind the suite's bulkhead, was a young, ambitious freelance journalist named Oliver Reed. He had been chasing a story on tech acquisitions and had booked the expensive flight, hoping for a chance encounter with Andrew Finch. He didn't get an interview. He got something far better. When Leo's screams had first started, Oliver, like everyone else, had been alarmed. But unlike everyone else, his journalistic instincts had taken over. He had discreetly activated the video recorder on his phone, aiming it at the frosted glass door of the celestial suite. The video was mostly audio, but it was powerful. It captured Leo's raw screams of agony. It captured Andrew's furious, booming voice. "Stop it right now! I said enough!" And then through the slightly ajar door, as Serena entered, his phone had caught a few crucial damning seconds of video. Andrew, hand-raised, red-faced and snarling, standing over his cowering son. It was blurry, it was brief, but it was unmistakable. He then recorded the long ensuing silence, followed by Serena's calm exit. Oliver Reed knew he had lightning in a bottle. This was not a story about a merger anymore. This was a story about a monster. He had no idea an even bigger story was about to fall into his lap, transforming his grainy footage from a scoop into a cultural bombshell. By the time Andrew Finch was being whisked through a private Heathrow terminal, Oliver Reed was already in an airport lounge, his laptop open, his heart pounding. He uploaded the audio and the brief video clip to a secure server and sent the link to the editor of a notoriously aggressive online news outlet, the Daily Torch. The headline, posted just 3 hours later, was "Explosive Billionaire Tyrant Andrew Finch, filmed in mid-air, fury at disabled son. Enough!" He roared at screaming 10-year-old. The story went nuclear. It was the perfect storm of outrage. The potent combination of wealth, power, perceived cruelty, and the vulnerability of a disabled child created a firestorm on social media. The hashtag #JusticeForLeo started trending on Twitter within the hour. The grainy footage of Andrew with his hand raised became a viral meme, a symbol of corporate heartlessness. Andrew was in a meeting with the Sterling Vance executives, his phone on silent, blissfully unaware of the inferno erupting online. By the time he switched it back on, he had 300 missed calls. His world was on fire. But the story was only half told. The public had the villain. They were desperate for a hero. They found one in Serena Washington. Another passenger in first class, a tech CEO from Silicon Valley, who was impressed by Serena's grace under pressure, had tweeted, "On my flight to London, witnessed something extraordinary. A flight attendant on Stellara Air, named Serena, single-handedly calmed a child in severe distress after his father, a famous billionaire, completely lost it. She was a picture of compassion and professionalism." The internet detectives went to work. Within hours they had found her. Her name, Serena Washington, was cross-referenced with employee manifests that were inevitably leaked. Serena. The savior began to trend alongside #JusticeForLeo. Stellara Air, caught in a PR maelstrom, initially tried to shut it down with a generic corporate statement about privacy. It backfired spectacularly. The public demanded they celebrate Serena, not silence her. The story reached a new devastating level when Oliver Reed, buoyed by his success, did some more digging. He discovered that Finch Dynamics was just weeks away from launching its most ambitious project ever, a revolutionary, compassionate AI. It was a suite of AI-driven tools designed for healthcare and education, promising to provide empathetic, responsive care to the elderly and those with special needs. The hypocrisy was staggering. It was a karma bomb. Oliver's follow-up article was even more damaging. Exclusive: Andrew Finch filmed berating disabled son. Set to launch: compassionate AI in ultimate act of hypocrisy. The story was no longer just about a father's cruelty. It was about massive systemic corporate fraud. How could a man who showed zero compassion to his own son be the face of a company selling compassion as a product? The media frenzy was absolute. CNN, BBC, Reuters. Every major outlet picked it up. Psychologists were brought on air to dissect the video, to talk about the trauma of children with ASD. Business analysts were brought on to discuss the Finch Dynamics brand. The scratch on Andrew's face, visible in the paparazzi shots of him leaving his London hotel, was analysed ad nauseum. And through it all, Serena Washington remained silent. Stellara Air had put her on paid leave, ordering her not to speak to the media. But her silence was more powerful than any statement. She became a symbol of quiet dignity and true compassion, a stark contrast to the bellowing rage of the billionaire. She didn't know that her single act of grace, giving a frightened boy her lanyard, had lit the fuse on a karmic explosion that would not only destroy a billionaire's reputation, but would also force him into a reckoning he never could have imagined. The world was watching, passing judgment, and the hardest karma was yet to come. The initial tremor hit Andrew not from a stock ticker, but from the vibrating phone of his PR chief, Julian Vance. They were in a glass-walled conference room, overlooking Canary Wharf, preparing to offer Sterling Vance executives reassurances when Julian's face went the color of ash. He stared at his screen, his mouth slightly agape, before looking at Andrew with an expression of pure terror. "We have a problem." Julian whispered the words, seeming to suck the oxygen from the room. "A significant multi-platform media event." "What event?" Andrew snapped, irritated by the interruption. "Did the quarterly projections leak?" "Worse," Julian said, turning the phone around. The screen displayed the garish, bold headline from the Daily Torch. "Billionaire tyrant Andrew Finch filmed in mid-air fury at disabled son." Andrew read the words, but his mind refused to process them. It was like reading a sentence in a foreign language. He saw the grainy, still frame of himself, red-faced and looming. He heard the embedded audio file playing from Julian's phone, his own voice distorted and monstrous roaring. "I said enough! This is garbage!" He spat a reflexive denial. "This is a tabloid lie. It's a doctored photo. Slander. We'll sue them into oblivion." "Andrew, the audio is clean," Julian said, his voice trembling. "And a passenger, a CEO named Michael Chen, has already tweeted about it. He's praising the flight attendant, Serena Washington, for stepping in. It's corroboration. This isn't a spark, Andrew. It's an inferno. The hashtag #Justice for Leo is the #1 trend worldwide." The true cataclysm, however, was not just social but conceptual. Oliver Reed's follow-up article, which landed like a precision-guided missile just an hour later, connected his behavior on the plane to the core of his business. The headline was a masterpiece of corporate assassination. "Exclusive: Andrew Finch filmed berating disabled son, set to launch. Compassionate AI in ultimate act of hypocrisy. That was the kill shot. On Monday morning, when the London Stock Exchange opened, the market didn't just react, it passed a death sentence. Finch Dynamics. FNC wasn't just a tech stock anymore. It was a moral paradox. On financial news channels, analysts weren't discussing PE ratios. They were discussing ethics. There's a fundamental trust deficit here, one commentator on Bloomberg TV explained, gesturing at a graph that showed a vertical red line. How can you sell empathy as a service when the man at the top displays a catastrophic lack of it? The compassionate AI brand, which was their entire growth strategy, is now radioactive. No hospital, no school, no institution will touch it. The stock opened down 30%. Trading was halted twice within the first hour to prevent a total collapse. Billions in value were wiped out before Andrew had finished his first bitter cup of coffee. His phone, once a conduit of power, was now a harbinger of doom, each buzz announcing another defection, another panicked call from an institutional investor. The Sterling-Vance merger wasn't just in jeopardy. Its board had issued a curt public statement, formally withdrawing their offer, citing a fundamental misalignment of corporate values. The emergency board meeting was convened not as a discussion, but as an execution. Andrew, cloistered in his hotel suite, dialed into the video conference to see a gallery of grim, predatory faces staring back at him. These were the men he had made rich, the titans he had handpicked for their ruthlessness. He had never imagined that ruthlessness would one day be turned on him. Marcus Thorne, his face a mask of somber gravitas, took control immediately. "Andrew," he began, his voice dangerously calm. "We have all seen the news. We have all seen the stock performance. This board has a singular, sacred obligation, our fiduciary duty to the shareholders, an obligation you have in the course of a single weekend catastrophically compromised. This is a personal attack, Marcus, a media hit job." Andrew countered, his voice hoarse. "It's a family matter, twisted and manipulated for clicks. We can fight this. A new PR campaign, we can do nothing as long as you are the face of this company." Marcus cut in, his voice hardening. "This isn't about one video, Andrew. It's about a pattern of arrogance that we have all privately noted for years. You've always believed you were the exception to every rule. This time your behavior has created a reputational black hole that is threatening to swallow the entire company. The brand is no longer just tainted, it may be terminal." Another board member, a hedge fund manager named Chen, spoke up, his tone icy. "Andrew, my fund has lost $400 million on our FNC position since this morning. Our ethics committee is demanding we divest completely. You haven't just created a PR problem. You've violated the implicit trust of the market. You are, as of today, an uninsurable risk." The arguments were clinical, brutal, and undeniable. Andrew tried to appeal to loyalty, to their shared history, to the fortunes he had built for them. But he saw only cold calculation in their eyes. He was a diseased limb, and they were preparing to amputate to save the body. The vote was a formality. A series of detached, solemn eyes echoed in his speakers. Andrew Finch was removed as CEO and chairman of Finch Dynamics, effective immediately pending an internal investigation. He was to take an indefinite leave of absence. He was out. The news of his ousting, meant to stabilize the stock, only confirmed the severity of the crisis, causing another wave of selling. The empire he had dedicated his life to building had excised him like a cancer. His journey home was a descent into a fresh hell. He flew commercial tucked into a corner of the first-class cabin of a British Airways flight. The Stellara Air name was now too toxic for him to even contemplate. The flight attendants spoke to him in hushed, fearful whispers, their professional smiles, unable to hide their awareness of who he was. He felt their judgment, their pity, their revulsion. The luxury of the seat, the taste of the champagne, it all felt like a mockery. He landed at JFK and was shuffled through a side exit to avoid the pack of journalists waiting at the arrivals hall. The drive to his Greenwich mansion was silent. His driver, a man who had worked for him for 10 years, didn't dare speak. The house when he entered was no longer a palace. It was a tomb, vast, cold, and utterly silent. His live-in staff had left their agent citing a hostile work environment. His email inbox was a graveyard of broken contracts and legal notices. His phone was silent. The powerful no longer called. In this crushing silence, one sound eventually reached him. A soft rhythmic sound from upstairs. Zip, zip, zip. He walked up the marble staircase, his footsteps echoing in the emptiness, and stopped at the doorway to Leo's room. His son was on the floor, perfectly calm, his back to the door. His complete attention was on the object in his hands. Serena Washington's simple black and silver lanyard. He was tracing its woven pattern again and again, the soft sound the only sign of life in the colossal house. Andrew stood there, the disgraced titan, the fallen king, and watched. He saw the lanyard not just as an object, but as a symbol. It was a symbol of the connection he had failed to make, of a language he had refused to learn. It was a testament to a woman who, with a simple act of empathy, had shown more parental instinct than he had in a decade. The scale of his failure crashed down upon him. He hadn't just lost his money or his company. That was a game, and he had simply lost a round. This was different. He had lost his moral authority, his self-respect, his very identity. The viral video hadn't just destroyed his public image. It had held up a mirror, forcing him to see the monster he had become. And now, in the ruins of his life, the only thing left was the son he had so catastrophically failed, a boy who found more comfort in a cheap piece of fabric from a stranger than he had ever found in his own father. The karma had been delivered, and it was absolute. The days that followed Andrew Finch's return were not merely quiet. They were a crushing, suffocating void. His life, once a symphony of relentless forward motion of acquisitions, commands, and calculations, had devolved into a single, monotonous, looping note of failure. He was a prisoner in his own creation, a king wandering the empty halls of his conquered but hollow kingdom. The Greenwich mansion, a sprawling testament to his ambition, built of cold marble and unforgiving glass, became his cage. The smart home system he'd designed, which once responded to his every whim, now seemed to mock him. Lights would come on in rooms he never entered. The climate control would hum heating air for no one. He'd walk past the cavernous home theatre, its screen dark, and remember boasting about its specifications. He'd see the pristine turquoise water of the infinity pool untouched, and recall the lavish parties he'd thrown, not for pleasure, but for influence. Every corner of the house was a monument to a life built for an audience that had now departed, leaving him alone with the ghosts of his own hubris. His isolation was absolute. The world outside the manicured hedges was hostile territory. News vans were camped at the end of his long driveway, like vultures. A single attempt to walk the grounds resulted in a flurry of telephoto lens flashes from the woods. And the next day, a pathetic picture of him, haggard and lost, was splashed across the internet, under the headline, "The Fallen Tyrant's Lonely Walk." He saw himself debated on cable news, his character dissected by pop psychologists who spoke of narcissistic rage and emotional voids. He was no longer a person. He was a pathology, a public cautionary tale. In the first week, his mind, so accustomed to strategic warfare, attempted to fight back. He cycled through the familiar stages of a losing battle. There was denial, a frantic belief that it was all a sophisticated smear campaign he could defeat with better lawyers. Then came rage, a blistering, impotent fury directed at Marcus Thorne for his betrayal at the media, for their sensationalism, at the anonymous passenger for filming him, and most irrationally at Serena Washington for being the catalyst for his ruin. He paced his office, plotting lawsuits and revenge fantasies that turned to dust in his mouth. Then came the bargaining. This was his natural element. "Every problem has a price," he muttered to himself. He would fix this. He would make a grand gesture. He spent an entire afternoon researching planning a multi-million-dollar donation to a national autism advocacy group. He would build the Finch Center for Neurodiverse Development. He even drafted a press release. But as he read the hollow, self-serving words, a wave of revulsion washed over him. It was the same old tactic, throwing money at a problem he refused to understand. It was the logic of compassionate AI. It was a lie. Defeated, he fell into a deep, listless depression, and it was in this state that he finally began to truly focus on Leo. His previous attempts to connect had been just another form of management. He went online and, with the cold precision of a procurement officer, ordered the finest sensory objects money could buy. A set of perfectly spherical jade bearding balls, a collection of velvet-smooth onyx riverstones, a cashmere blanket, even softer than the Hermès one Leo already had. The expensive packages arrived, and Andrew presented them to his son with the air of a man bestowing a great gift. Leo glanced at the offerings, his expression unreadable. He tentatively touched one of the cold, perfect jade balls, then recoiled slightly, as if its soulless perfection was an insult. He pushed the polished onyx stones away. His hands went immediately back to the object of his devotion, the cheap, woven black and silver Stellara Air lanyard. He held it to his cheek, its familiar worn texture a shield against his father's latest clumsy intrusion. The rejection was more profound than any boardroom defeat. Andrew had offered superior products, and they had been deemed worthless. His next strategy was to impose order. He drew up a schedule taping it to Leo's door. 9:00 a.m., 10:00 a.m. sensory integration, jade spheres. 10:30 a.m., 11:00 a.m. non-verbal communication practice. He approached his son's condition like a failing project that required more rigorous oversight. The result was an immediate shutdown. Leo retreated so far into himself that he became almost motionless, his rocking ceasing, his eyes vacant. He was a fortress, and Andrew's siege tactics were only strengthening the walls. One evening, after another day of failures, Andrew found himself utterly spent. The fight had gone out of him. He sank to the floor in the hallway outside Leo's room, his back against the wall, a general surveying the ruins of his final, most personal battlefield. He didn't try to enter. He didn't try to speak. For the first time, he simply listened, and he heard it. The only sound in the vast, silent house. Zip, zip, zip. The soft, rhythmic friction of his son's thumb stroking the lanyard. He closed his eyes. The sound became a mantra, pulling him back through time, back into the pressurized air of the celestial suite. He replayed the scene, but his perspective had shifted. He wasn't the star of this memory anymore. He was a spectator. He saw the scene not through the lens of his own embarrassment, but through the wide, terrified eyes of his son. He felt the overwhelming chaos of the lights, the sounds, the strange smells. He felt the panic of losing the one object that made sense. He felt the terror of his own father's angry touch, the confusion of his roaring voice. Then he saw Serena. He saw her dim the lights. He heard her low, steady hum. He watched her crawl across the floor, making herself small, unthreatening. He saw her offer not a solution, but a connection, an anchor. The lanyard. She hadn't fixed a problem. She had honored a person. The contrast between her actions and his own was a physical blow. A chasm opened in his understanding of the world. His entire life had been a series of transactions. He paid for service, he demanded results, he acquired assets. Serena had operated on a different plane entirely, one of grace, of giving without expectation of return, one he couldn't even comprehend, let alone access. This devastating epiphany brought with it a flood of other memories, the ghosts of ignored warnings. A preschool teacher 5 years ago. Mr. Finch Leo needs consistency and calm. Your unpredictable schedule is very difficult for him. A nanny who had quit. Sir, you can't just expect him to snap out of it. He's not being difficult. He's in distress. He had dismissed them all as incompetent, unable to handle a challenging child. Now he saw that they were prophets, and he had been a fool. He was the problem. His arrogance, his impatience, his cold, transactional view of humanity. He was the source of the storm that his son was forced to navigate every single day. He opened his eyes, staring at the polished wood of Leo's door. The lanyard wasn't a rebuke. It was a road map. A map to a place he didn't know how to find, held by a woman he had insulted and tried to dismiss with a wad of cash. With a surge of desperation so powerful it felt like he was drowning, he knew what he had to do. It was the ultimate act of surrender, an admission that the entire foundation of his life was worthless. He had to beg. Finding her was a new lesson in his own powerlessness. He called Stellara Air's corporate line. The name Andrew Finch was no longer a magic word. It was a contamination. He was transferred through a disorienting maze of automated systems and skeptical junior HR assistants. We cannot give out employee information, sir. I understand. This is not a complaint. I need to pass on a message. Is this regarding a legal matter, sir? Finally summoning a ghost of his old authority, he reached a vice president of human resources. Listen to me, he said, but his voice was stripped of its menace, leaving only a raw plea. I am not threatening a lawsuit. I am not filing a grievance. I am a father asking for help. I need to speak to Serena Washington. Please just give her my personal number and a message. Tell her I need to understand. 2 agonizing days passed. He expected nothing. Why would she ever want to speak to him again? Then his phone rang, an unknown number. He answered with a hand that trembled. Hello. This is Serena Washington. Her voice was cautious, professional, and layered with suspicion. Andrew had to steady himself against a wall. Ms. Washington. Serena. Thank you for calling. It's Andrew Finch. He heard a sharp intake of breath on her end. I know, he said, stumbling over the words, the pre-rehearsed speeches dissolving into a raw, broken confession. I know you have no reason to speak to me. I know an apology it's worthless. But I'm not calling about me. Not about the company or the money or any of it. It's all gone. I'm calling to apologize for what I did on that plane. To you and to my son." He paused, his breath catching in his throat. "You were right. I saw an inconvenient situation. You saw a child in pain. I've lost everything I thought was important, and I'm left here in this empty house with the only person who ever mattered, and he's a stranger to me. I sit outside his door, and I don't know how to get in." He confessed everything, the failed attempts with the stones, the schedules, the look in Leo's eyes. His voice cracked. "That lanyard, that simple thing you gave him, he hasn't let it go. It's his world. It's a piece of your understanding, your compassion, and I have none. I don't know what it is. I want to. I have to." The plea finally came out, the most terrifying and honest words he'd ever spoken. "Ms. Washington, Serena, I'm not asking you to forgive me. I'm not offering you anything. I am begging. Please, teach me. Show me where to start. How do I learn my son's language?" The silence on the other end of the line stretched for an eternity. He could hear her breathing, could imagine her on the other side, a world away, in every sense. He expected her to hang up, to tell him he deserved his lonely hell. But when she spoke, her voice was different. The suspicion was gone, replaced by a solemn, weary gravity. "Mr. Finch," she said slowly, "I am not a miracle worker. I am not a therapist. The person who taught me everything was my younger brother, who has a condition much like your son's. The journey is not easy. It will be the hardest work you will ever do. It has nothing to do with money or power, and everything to do with patience, with listening, and with dismantling everything you think you know. It starts with you, not with him." A sound escaped Andrew's lips, a ragged guttural sob of relief and despair. It was the sound of a man who had finally truly surrendered. It was the sound of rock bottom, and it was the first terrifying, hopeful echo of a new beginning. Andrew Finch's journey was just beginning. It wasn't a quick fix or a Hollywood ending. It was a slow, grueling process of unlearning a lifetime of arrogance and learning a new language of patience and acceptance. Guided by the resources Serena provided, he began to dismantle the walls around his own heart, to finally see the son who had been there all along. He never regained his company, but he started the long, painful road to regaining his humanity. Serena Washington became a quiet legend at Stellara Air. She accepted a new role, developing and leading a new empathy and disability awareness training program for all cabin crews, turning her one act of grace into a new standard of care. Her story serves as a powerful reminder that true wealth is not measured in stock prices or private suites, but in our capacity for compassion. It shows that karma isn't always a lightning bolt of revenge. Sometimes it's a quiet, persistent force that strips away everything we value to show us what is truly valuable. A single act of kindness didn't just calm a child. It tore down an empire and just maybe built the foundation for a father. What did you think of this story? Have you ever witnessed a moment where simple human decency completely changed a situation? Let us know in the comments below. These real-life dramas happen every day, often hidden behind headlines. If you want more stories that uncover the truth and explore the powerful forces of human nature, please hit that like button. Share this video with someone who needs to see it, and be sure to subscribe to our channel for more content that makes you think. Thank you for watching.